Many creation stories start with a god, one voice, one will, one act of divine power that sparks everything into motion. But not this one. This story begins before time, before matter, before even the idea of a creator. It begins in a place beyond form, outside the reach of stars or atoms, a place called the pleroma. Not heaven, not paradise, but something harder to define. A fullness, a vast, silent totality. From that silence came motion, a series of emanations, echoes, thoughts unfolding into thoughts, being into being. These were the Aeons. They weren't gods in the traditional sense. They didn't rule. They didn't speak in thunder or demand your obedience. They were the hidden forces behind everything in the universe. But then, something went wrong. One Aeon strayed too far from the norm, reached too low, and from those actions, something impossible was born. That's the world we live in today. And the Aeons? They've been trying to reach you ever since. This is the story of the Aeons, the primordial gods from Gnostic mythology. Long before the world was shaped, before matter, light, or time, there was only the one. The Gnostics called it the monad, the source. Pure being without form, beyond thought, beyond name, beyond anything the human mind could hold. It didn't act out of need or desire. It didn't create because it lacked anything. It simply overflowed. And from that overflowing came motion. Not in a burst, but in unfolding, like ripples spreading from stillness. The monad expressed itself through the unfolding of energy, pure intelligences, cascading outward in balanced pairs. Each one reflected an aspect of the divine mind. These were the Aeons. You've heard the names before: Sophia, Nous, Aletheia, Charis, Logos. They sound like gods, powerful, distant, divine. But that's not quite what they are. In the world of Gnosticism, the Aeons aren't gods in the way most people understand the term. They don't sit on thrones. They don't throw lightning or demand sacrifices. They don't compete for devotion or unleash plagues out of spite. To call them gods is to shrink them, to frame them in a language far too small. The Aeons are something deeper, stranger, more elemental. They are emanations, radiant expressions of the unknowable source, the monad. Where other belief systems speak of a god who creates, commands, and controls, the Gnostics spoke of a divine reality that unfolds. The monad, being perfect, doesn't act or will, it emanates. And from these echoes came the Aeons. Each Aeon is a living principle, not a personality, but a force. They are the building blocks of divine intelligence itself. Where we use language to describe thoughts and feelings, words like love, wisdom, understanding, or grace, the Gnostics believed these weren't just ideas, they were real. They had being, and their being was aeonic. So when they spoke of Sophia, wisdom, or Thelitos, will, or Aletheia, truth, they weren't describing abstract concepts. They were naming actual dimensions of divine existence, expressions of the monad's perfect fullness. And if you want to simplify this, just think of them as primordial gods. They exist not in our world or even near it, but in the pleroma, a realm beyond the veil, untouched by time or form. The pleroma isn't a place the way heaven is often imagined. It's not up in the clouds or tucked behind the stars. It's a state of being, a field of total awareness where nothing is broken, nothing is lacking, and everything exists in luminous balance. The Aeons dwell here like ripples inside ripples, interconnected, ever-flowing. They exist in syzygies or pairs, masculine and feminine principles moving in perfect reciprocity. Mind and truth, word and life, grace and will. They spiral out in ordered patterns, never conflicting, never corrupting. The Gnostics described them as a kind of divine ecosystem, where every quality of the source finds its perfect reflection in one or more Aeons. They don't rule, they don't command, they don't intervene in the world the way ancient deities might have. Their action is not action as we know it. It's presence, a kind of eternal resonance. But the Gnostic stories weren't meant to stay still. Even in this realm of perfect harmony, something begins to shift. Because within the Aeons, among those countless perfect qualities, was one called Sophia. And Sophia did something no other Aeon had done before. She turned her gaze inward. She longed to understand the source in its entirety, to know that which cannot be known, not in rebellion or malice, but in the deep, sacred yearning for truth. But before we get to that moment, we need to understand who the Aeons truly are. Their names, their roles, their radiant forms in the fullness of divine being. Because once we know them, we'll start to see their reflections, faint and flickering, even here. In dreams, in memories, in those sudden moments where the world doesn't feel quite complete. In the Gnostic vision, the divine realm, the pleroma, meaning fullness, was not a throne room ruled by a jealous deity, but a radiance of thought, a vast and living reality formed by manifestations of the divine mind. These were the Aeons. Not gods, not angels, but forces of pure meaning, each one alive with essence, each one a sacred concept made real. Wisdom, grace, will, truth, faith, silence. And they didn't emerge all at once. The Aeons came forth in pairs, called syzygies, masculine and feminine, active and receptive, mind and heart, two harmonics forming a complete whole. In the most well-known Gnostic systems, especially among the Valentinians, there were 30 Aeons in total, arranged in 15 syzygies, grouped into 3 tiers: the Ogdoad, the Decad, and the Dodecad. Together, these beings formed a spiritual architecture, a divine hierarchy of consciousness so refined, so luminous, that no mortal mind could contain it in full. But we can glimpse it, like light seen through stained glass, in names and meanings passed down through fragmented scripture and whispered tradition. At the highest level of the pleroma stood the Ogdoad. 4 syzygies, 8 Aeons, the first to emanate from the monad. They were the root of divine thought, the foundation of everything that followed. Bythos, the primordial god of depth, and Sigsh, the primordial goddess of silence. Bythos represents the unfathomable abyss of being, the original monad, limitless and incomprehensible. His consort, Sigsh, is the sacred silence before any thought arises. Not absence, but stillness, the condition for all potential. Together, they symbolize divine mystery and the stillness from which all existence flows. Gnos, the primordial god of divine mind, and Aletheia, the primordial goddess of truth. Nous is the first expression of awareness, the divine intellect that contemplates the source. Aletheia, his counterpart, is the radiant truth that arises from that contemplation. Mind beholds. Truth is what is known. Their pairing marks the first act of self-reflection within the divine. Logos, the primordial god of reason, and Zoe, the primordial goddess of life. Logos embodies divine reason, not just speech, but the ordering principle of all meaning and structure. Beside him is Zoe, the eternal life force, not biological, but spiritual vitality itself. Together, they express order and vitality in perfect harmony. Anthropos, the primordial god of divine humanity, and Ecclesia, the primordial goddess of spiritual unity. Anthropos is the ideal human, not flesh and blood, but consciousness formed in the image of divinity. Ecclesia is the gathering of spirits, the unity of the soul's return to its origin. Their union represents the sacred potential of humanity joined in harmony with the divine. These 8 are pure balance, ideas not yet stained by matter, form, or fracture. They dance in unison at the heart of the pleroma, and from them, more aeons would unfold. From the Ogdoad emerged the next generation of aeons, 10 in total, arranged in 5 syzygies. This grouping is known as the Decad. While we follow the Valentinian tradition here, it's important to remember that other Gnostic schools sometimes offer slightly different names or pairings. Still, the spiritual structure remains consistent. Male and female, active and receptive, concept and completion. Theletos, the primordial god of divine will, and Synesis, the primordial goddess of understanding. Theletos embodied the pure desire of the source to express itself, while Synesis gave form to that will through deep insight. Charis, the primordial god of grace, and Agape, the primordial goddess of divine love. Charis radiated spiritual generosity, while Agape poured forth selfless, transcendent love that binds all things in unity. Pistis, the primordial goddess of faith, and Elpis, the primordial god of hope. Pistis offered inner trust, a knowing that surpassed evidence, while Elpis awakened the longing for reunion with the divine. Irene, the primordial goddess of peace, and Dikaiosine, the primordial god of justice. Irene was the stillness of perfect order, and Dikaiosine upheld balance, ensuring that harmony flowed through every divine motion. Hagiosine, the primordial goddess of holiness, and Metria, the primordial god of moderation. Hagiosine stood for sacred purity, untouched by distortion, while Metria kept all things in divine proportion. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. Following the Decad came the Dodecad, 12 more Aeons forming 6 syzygies. These were the most differentiated of all, representing the spiritual qualities that hovered near the boundary of the pleroma. Still divine, still holy, but their symbolic distance from the monad made them more vulnerable to separation, yearning, and paradox. Monogenes, the primordial god of unique divinity, and Parakletos, the primordial goddess of divine advocacy. Monogenes reflected the only begotten essence of the source, singular, self-aware. Parakletos stood as the gentle intercessor, offering inner comfort and guiding lost souls toward gnosis. Macaria, the primordial goddess of blessedness, and Akhenatos, the primordial god of immovability. Macaria radiated the joy of divine serenity, while Akhenatos held firm as the unshakable ground of spiritual certainty. Henosis, the primordial god of unity, and Koinonia, the primordial goddess of communion. Henosis called all things back into oneness. Koinonia created the bond, the shared connection, that echoed the collective soul's return. Anaposis, the primordial god of divine rest, and Eusebia, the primordial goddess of reverence. Anaposis offered stillness beyond striving, while Eusebia stood as respectful devotion, piety rooted in love, not fear. Phanerosis, the primordial goddess of revelation, and Eclaipsis, the primordial god of withdrawal. Phanerosis unveiled the truths long hidden, while Eclipsis represented the retreat of the divine into mystery, challenging the soul to seek deeper. Sophia, the primordial goddess of wisdom, and Christ, the primordial god of divine radiance and restoration. Sophia longed to comprehend the unknowable source on her own, a solitary act that fractured the harmony of the pleroma and became central to the Gnostic mythos. In some Valentinian traditions, her counterpart is Christ, whose emanation brings clarity, balance, and the healing power needed to restore what Sophia's yearning had unsettled. Together, they represent the tension between seeking and understanding, the descent into fragmentation, and the path back to divine fullness. At this point, the pleroma was full, 30 Aeons, 15 syzygies, each one unfolding from the last in divine order. It was a realm of breathtaking stillness and perfection. That was until Sophia changed everything. Among all the Aeons, Sophia, whose name means wisdom, stood apart. She was the youngest of the 30, the final emanation within the pleroma. But youth in the divine realm didn't mean immaturity or foolishness. It meant proximity to the edge, to the veil, to the boundary where divine order fades into possibility and uncertainty. Sophia, unlike the other Aeons, was restless. She burned with a holy curiosity, a desire to know the monad directly, not through manifestations, not through reflection, but face to face, heart to source. She didn't seek power. She wasn't rebelling. She simply wanted to return to the beginning, to understand the root of all being. But there was a rule, an unspoken order in the pleroma. The monad was unknowable. The source could only be reflected, not grasped. To seek it directly was to strain the harmony of divine unfolding. And when Sophia reached beyond her station, when she tried to behold the monad without her counterpart, alone, something shattered. Her act created an imbalance, a tear in the divine symmetry. And from that rift, something else emerged. A being formed, not in the fullness of the pleroma, but in the shadow of divine intention. A malformed creator, an echo without clarity, a craftsman who believed himself God because he had never seen the light beyond. This was the demiurge. He was not evil in the cartoonish sense, but he was blind, arrogant. He thought himself supreme because he came into being cut off from the Aeons. He knew nothing of the monad. He could not see the source, and yet, with the raw power inherited from Sophia's essence, he began to shape. And what he shaped was this world. A realm of matter, of time, of death. A prison that mimicked the pleroma in form, but not in substance. Sophia, horrified by what had happened, descended in grief. Some Gnostics say she was cast out. Others say she fell willingly, choosing to dwell in the lower realms to help guide the trapped sparks of spirit scattered within creation. Either way, her essence became immanent, present in all things, especially in us. Because that's the part many forget. In the Gnostic myth, human souls carry Sophia's light. We are not born of mud alone. We are the fragments of her divine spark, buried under layers of illusion, matter, and forgetfulness. Sophia's story is not a simple fall. It's a fracture. A divine heartbreak that echoes through every soul that looks around and thinks, "This doesn't feel right." In every myth, there's a border, a place where order thins and something else begins. In most stories, it's a forest, a sea, a gate. But to the Gnostics, this boundary wasn't physical. It wasn't even a place. It was something far more subtle and far more absolute. They called it the Horos. The word means limit or marker. A metaphysical line, a spiritual tension. It was where the radiance of the pleroma, of harmony, truth, and endless light, reached its outermost edge and could no longer sustain its symmetry. Beyond that edge was not just absence, it was inversion. The Aeons, with all their balance and brilliance, existed within the pleroma, but even they could not move beyond this threshold. The Horos was not a gate to be opened, it was the very point where divine order fractured into distortion. And what lay beyond was chaos. Not the chaos of mythology, not titans, not storms, not monsters, but a formless, anxious turbulence, a realm where structure collapsed into simulation, where permanence gave way to decay. This was the Kenoma, the emptiness, the hollow space into which Sophia's accidental emanation had fallen, and from that rupture, the false world began to take shape. Time, matter, mortality, the illusion of separation. Here, at the root of material existence, rules were no longer divine. They were derivative. The things of this world, bodies, names, nations, laws, they imitated patterns from the pleroma, but they carried no spark of the original. They were shadows cast by beings who had forgotten the light. This was the domain of the demiurge, the blind craftsman who mistook his imitation for truth. He built the cosmos like a prison shaped after a palace, unaware of the reality he had distorted. His world was orderly, but not divine. Legal, but not just. Beautiful, perhaps, but hollow. And yet, despite the rupture, despite the Horos, something remained. A trace, a warmth, a whisper. The Aeons could not pass the boundary, but they could reach across it. Not with force, not with miracles, but through a kind of resonance. Their presence echoed in the soul, like a forgotten song that stirs something too deep to name. These echoes were not messages, they were reminders. That's what Gnosis was, not secret knowledge to be hoarded, but memory awakening. A jolt, a flicker, a subtle collapse of the illusion. The Gnostics taught that when the soul remembers its origin, when it recognizes the false world for what it is, the Horos ceases to be a wall. It becomes something thinner, more fragile, a veil that trembles when truth draws near. And once you've seen through it, even for a moment, you're never quite the same. Salvation, to the Gnostics, wasn't about pleasing a god or following a law. It had nothing to do with obedience, sin, or ritual. It was about waking up, and the ones who tried to help us wake, the ones who reached across the veil, were not angels or prophets or wrathful gods. They were the Aeons. Specifically, two of them stood at the heart of this mission: Christ and Sophia. Christ, in the Gnostic view, was not simply a man or a sacrifice. He was an Aeon, a direct emanation of the divine pleroma. His role was not to die for sins, but to bring gnosis, to remind the trapped spark within humanity that it came from somewhere else, somewhere higher. He descended through the layers of illusion, not to fix the world, but to call us out of it. His teachings, in their purest form, were a map, a coded message, a set of keys disguised as parables and riddles. He didn't demand worship. He offered reflection. He didn't build temples. He shattered illusions. And the knowledge he brought wasn't for the masses. It was for those ready to remember. But he didn't act alone. Sophia, fallen, fractured, grieving, was also still present. Not in some far-off heaven, but here, inside the material world, in its beauty, in its pain, in the deep, aching sense that something's missing. Together, Christ and Sophia form a kind of divine polarity, the call and the echo. Christ descends with memory, Sophia rises with longing, and in the meeting point between the two, when the soul hears both voices, something stirs, something ancient, something forgotten. And that is the moment of gnosis. You don't become divine, you remember you were all along. And when that happens, when the soul remembers its origin, its spark, its true home, the prison loses power. The archons hold no sway. The demiurge becomes a shadow. And the Horos, the great barrier between realms, begins to dissolve from within. This is the role of the Aeons in salvation, not as saviors who swoop down to rescue, but as signals sent from the true reality, guiding you out of the illusion.